And we're live.
Okay, call to order at 9:04.
Very good.
So the purpose of this meeting is to progress our discussion on TC80. And from the first meeting we had where we sort of prepared a charter, the first action item was basically to create a vision of what we would like to see that could occur in the TC80 over the next 20 to 25 years. And from this vision, we then imagine a number of things will fall out, which will provide action points for other parts of this particular project. So as it's a brainstorming session, there's like no idea is a dumb idea. We're not going to rule things out through this exercise. We're just going to say, in a perfect world, if we had our druthers, what are the things which we would like to see in this in TC80 that would obviously lead to economic development in the town of Stonington. So having said that, maybe if we could just sort of go around the room or the screen, and each person can just list the things which they would like to see being committed in TC80, and I'll start writing notes. So Dave, as you're the first one on my screen, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I probably repeating a little bit of my spiel from the last meeting, Kevin, but what I would like to see is mixed use with high density residential included. So I think that, you know, as I mentioned last time, having a vision of TC80 becoming more of a lifestyle center where there's residential that has mobility, whether it's through pedestrian access, better pedestrian accommodation, traffic calming strategies, and more of a gateway into Stonington, so there's a sense of importance that you've arrived are integral to what we need. So I don't know about zoning changes with regards to signage for that, or there's no zoning change probably for the traffic calming strategies, but that should be part of the vision to enable and attract the residential development that would make it, would feed all the businesses. So, there'd be more beer drinkers at Jealous Monk, for example, and more patrons for the cinema, and shoppers at Quaid and so on. That's what I'd like to see. That's the main thing.
I think you hit the nail right on the head for me, Dave. That's almost exactly what I was going to say. And I think the way, in our long-term strategy to sort of link all that back to, making it more dense, more infill, if we really want to conserve the natural resources we have, then, we need to be putting more pressure to, keep things onto areas that are already covered. So for impervious cover, for roadways and utilities that are already established, why aren't we densifying those and then, keeping the sort of, the greener space around it, keep it green? Why can't we make the TC80 a denser, like you said, more connected, more pedestrian friendly, maybe make it so people can live and work, and with all the new telecommuting, it might be that they, live and work and play very close to, it used to be that was sort of the kick. We were all trying to make sure that people could, sort of stay in their own community. But as the telecommuting changed, I think it's going to be interesting to see if people continue to telecommute, and are their homes and the place of their homes in relation to, other things can change the land use patterns. I'm very curious about that.
And Susan, when you talk about work, I assume, does that mean it's maybe office space, or it's or working at home, or is there something in particular that we would need to?
I think it could be both. It would be nice if the zoning was flexible enough that things could sort of organically grow enough to sort of reflect the changes that are happening. I mean, we've seen 10,000 people come to our area And at least for the short term, they're staying. It's causing a huge, the housing market, got terrible pressure right now. The houses are on the market for like, a day. So I'm glad I'm not trying to buy a house right now. But I think it's going to be interesting. And I think that sometimes some of those people are going to stay, and they're going to decide that they like the life in our town better than in New York City or Boston or wherever, the more urban setting that they were from. And some of those people are going to stay, and we're going to need to find a way to accommodate those pressures. But if we can accommodate them within the infrastructure we already have, why wouldn't we do that?
Right.
Susan, at the beginning of when you started talking, I thought, maybe I think we had two different links for this meeting, which may have caused some confusion with John and Pete Robinson, who I think were going to come. And I missed some of your points about greenery or other things. Can you just go back about? I think it was about.
Yeah, Kevin. What I was really saying was, if we know that we're going to develop, at exit 90 and at exit 92, if we have those areas that are already, they are already sort of covered in impervious cover, they're already developed, there's the huge seas of parking lots that are available, why wouldn't we densify those buildings, make them higher, add more mixed use like we were talking about, allow for more housing, allow it to become more of a complete village so that people, are staying there, they can go to dinner, they can work from home, maybe there is some office space. Why wouldn't it be flexible so that people can make their own sort of little village to live in and walk around and not have to be, so car dependent. So much of our society is you have to get in your car to go from place to place. I think it would be much more enjoyable, to be able to just walk. But I also think it puts a lot less pressure on our natural resources. If we're taking areas that are already developed, maybe we develop them to a higher density, bigger height, or more types of buildings that we're allowing. But why wouldn't we do that? And then we can sort of preserve and conserve natural resources we have, the wetlands.
Okay, so your point was maybe more, yeah. So, okay, so it's more preserving the existing natural resources and greenery in town as opposed to trying to add more greenery in the TC80.
Sort of curb the suburban sprawl by just infilling the areas that we have that are already developing. Why wouldn't we just develop them more?
Right.
Okay.
And stay within the infrastructure we have. Then you're not piling on more infrastructure costs.
Yeah. I like the curb the existing or curb suburban sprawl and leverage existing infrastructure. Okay. Bill, let's go to you.
Just to sort of reiterate a lot of that and add that, sort of emphasize that mixed use component. A lot of those attributes are there, right? I mean, you can walk to a pharmacy, you can walk to a restaurant, you can walk to a grocery store, you can walk to shops. It's all there. And there's a little bit of residential there, especially, new development, a lot of Zurich's development over there on Jerry Brown. Masonic there has residents. There's, I think we kind of forget about the condos abutting there, just sort of behind True Value, Hindleburg, that area. So, but what is really missing is the connectivity of it all. I noted last week that, sort of walking along Route 27 there, that underpass, has all the charm of the Cross Bronx Expressway. And I don't think it would really take a lot to sort of make that more pedestrian friendly. And Sue, you and I have talked about, and we talked in the last meeting about some sort of river access there too. You could really tie all that together, I think, fairly easily. Politically, by Dave's sense of arrival, to the point of, it's already developed. I think it's the part of town where you can grow the grand list without much opposition. Not to overstate it, but I think for the most part, people don't really care about stuff there. Better or worse, specific zone. Well, not really my, but maybe nights and broadening up pieces and sort of clarifying the process a little bit. But I think that providing that pedestrian mobility in some way that makes sense and reconfiguring Coogan Boulevard, whatnot, I think would all go a long way to changing that area pretty dramatically.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and I think I heard you mention river access, Bill. So I'm going to put river access on all the points of things which we'd like to see if we could figure out as well.
And something we've talked about in the past and has been talked about endlessly over the years is that some sort of connection between exit 90 and downtown Mystic, and whether that's some kind of shuttle bus trolley that's been tried or some kind of river shuttle, or just encouraging people to walk. I think that should be an objective too, to sort of tie that together. We've talked about, people have been confused to get off at exit 90 and they think that Old Mystic Village is Mystic and that they've seen it all in the gun.
Right.
Great, thank you. Okay, so hi Pete, welcome. We're just sort of going around the screen and getting people's wish lists of things which they'd like to see permitted in TC80. So Keith, I'll go to you next.
Sure. I mean, when I think of this area, it sounds a little grandiose, but you almost think of the future of Mystic as a whole. Looking 50 or 100 years in the future, the village of Mystic does have its issues with sea level rise and protecting this historic village. This is the one area around here where you really don't have those issues to that extent. You're more high and dry. So I mean, looking forward, I think this area has to be more than highway commercial, hotels, and fast food restaurants. We have to have more uses there. We have to have more density because if things don't go well for the surrounding area, this would be the area that takes up the slack. But yeah, I definitely agree with what people have been saying here about having more density here, different sorts of uses, more pedestrian connectivity. Some of that is with off-road trails too. Some of the larger property owners, like the Nature Center in the Denison Society, have been working to connect their off-road trails to have better pedestrian access off-road. Riverfront access, and there's not too much opportunity for it now. I think the one property that would have a lot of opportunity is the hotel just north of the highway. I guess it's the Mystic River Inn, and the property behind it. There's a lot of opportunity for redevelopment of that parcel in conjunction with the vacant one in the back, and that's where the riverfront access could come into play more. We did have the study done by the Yukon landscape architect students a few years ago that touched on the pedestrian connectivity and the traffic calming issues and what could possibly be done there. Because we sort of want to have our cake and eat it too, with good vehicular access and lack of traffic congestion, but we do want better the safer routes for pedestrians. Old Mystic Village itself is just a great opportunity for this area. In a sense, it could be more than it is now. You could have different uses. And I know they have been thinking of having a hotel there, and they have diversified what they have over the past decade or so. They have more restaurants, they have Jealous Monk, they have a financial office where before it was more just retail and gift shops. And the water taxi also is something everyone's been thinking about for years, and just to have that better access to downtown Mystic without adding to the traffic congestion. And yeah, you know, Mystic has its issues with the sewer capacity, and the more those can be taken care of, the more you can have this sort of development or redevelopment that we've all been thinking of here.
Thanks. And Keith, I guess one question is, have you seen requests for zoning change for businesses, either whether it's in Old Mystic Village or in other places there that, you know, we're spending time on having to get approval for, where they could, you know, if they'd been incorporated in the first place, it wouldn't have required having to go to planning and zoning.
In this area, not so much. You know, when it comes to zoning, I mean, you have a lot of the properties there that are sort of ripe for redevelopment, you know, like the Friendlies and some of the older hotels. And, you know, there's more opportunity now to do more creative things because for one thing, the NDD can be used in this area now, which it couldn't before. So someone could have a master plan to do things that don't necessarily fit into the normal TC80 zoning there. So, you know, some of those larger sites could be more creatively redeveloped with a master plan. But of course, that doesn't rule out the fact that it's still zoned TC80, and we might have these high hopes for some grand redevelopment, and then some of these properties might just become a Dunkin' Donuts or something like that, because that is the low-hanging fruit, the easy thing for someone to come in and do. So there is always that that risk there too.
Okay, great, thanks.
Just a comment,
Bill.
if I could. You know, to Keith's point about river access, and you know, that those 2 lots north of the river with the hotel, and I think it's 6 acres along the river there. You know, one of the hurdles with that, it's pretty capital intensive. I mean, having talked to Tim Owens, who owns that lot on the river, he's thrown out a number of $6 million for that. So you've got $6 million for that. That hotel, I don't know what that 3 or 4 million they probably want. I mean, you're looking at the better part of 10 million just for land acquisition, and then you throw some kind of development on it. You know, you get to 20 or 30 million pretty quick before you have a hope of river access. There just doesn't seem to be a willingness, or hasn't been, to commit that kind of capital out there. So in terms of river access, I know if you look at the maps just south of 95, there's the 2 hotels, the Friendlies, the Roadway property, Roadway Inn, and the Howard Johnson's and Diner, but they come to sort of a pie and terminate before the river. The cemetery owns the DOT and the cemetery own that. The cemetery actually uses its river frontage there as basically a dump. When they excavate graves, they just pile all the dirt there along the river. So it might be a sort of easier to acquire some kind of right of way or easement, or just some sort of agreement with the cemetery to allow some kind of access there. Like, it'd be a much cheaper, faster, easier approach.
And Bill, when you talk about the DOT, are you talking about the right next to I-95?
Right. So they have a right of way that goes significantly wider than the highway. That encompasses a pretty good chunk of river frontage there.
Yeah. And logistically, it feels like it's more logical to have it on that side of I-95 as opposed to the other side of I-95.
It would seem more connected, I think, especially if you're trying to run something into downtown, right?
Anyway, I guess we're sort of getting into solutions, which will be step 2 after we agree what our vision will be. Okay, so Pete, I'll go back to you now on things which you think would be ideal to have permitted in the TC80 area.
I guess I like to see some residential, attractive residential stuff, some good shopping. You know, rather than getting too specific, I think it just needs to look a lot better. I know that's pretty vague and maybe lame, but I just think it needs to, when you drive into there, it just has to look better. And there's all these pieces that do look good. It's just like getting there isn't attractive, you know. So there's really cool places, but you have to go through this kind of Groton Long Hill Road type of vibe to get there. So,
So, and are you talking about both the streetscape as well as the buildings themselves?
It's more like the streetscape. I'd say just when you get off exit 90, you're just immediately, it just doesn't look as good as it could. That's my kind of opinion.
Had a great sense of pride.
And you know, if you kind of live here, you know, okay, I gotta go to Bill's place. But you don't really, you know, it's just kind of there. But if you're a visitor, it's kind of off-putting, I think.
Yeah. It's functional. It's I'll go and do my jobs, but it's not like, oh, you've arrived, or isn't this a wonderful place? It's not like a Disneyland. How everything is absolutely perfect.
Right.
We need to Nantucketize exit.
Yeah. Exactly.
Exit 90. Okay. So the only thing which I would add that I haven't heard from anyone else is bike paths. And then under housing, I don't know whether we can say we would like affordable housing to be included in that, just by saying housing is one of the things there that if someone wants to develop affordable housing, then it's permitted. So I don't know whether that's a discrete thing to put onto the list.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at the draft and our discussions with Don Poland, it's been in the POCD for eons, is to have inclusionary zoning in our regulation and a fee in lieu of. So, hopefully we can get to that point where if somebody wanted to build, if they thought the market was supporting market rate residential, that then they pay a fee into a fund that can be used to either develop or convert affordable housing in other parts of town. But I hope we get to that point.
So can I put that on this list, Dave? That was one of my things with Smiler's Wharf. We thought, well, maybe river frontage probably doesn't make sense, or it isn't maybe economically viable for affordable housing. But if we had something to this, and you don't have to do it, but here's the way that you'll help increase the amount of affordable housing in Stonington by having some regulation there, and gives people the choice.
We can do. Yeah, and we can do both, because the inclusionary zoning would be an overlay district that would say, like, the TC80 is an inclusionary zone for mixed income housing, but then that would also stipulate what incentives there are. So whether or not an incentive would be great enough to overcome, as Bill was saying, $10 million of land acquisition cost. And to your point, Kevin, probably not economically viable, but there could be sections of the TC80 where the land cost wouldn't be, the riverfront's, absolutely going to be a premium. So there could be sections where an inclusionary zone that comes with incentives, so that there's the tax abatements or the other incentive, waiving of fees, that type of thing, where we put that inclusionary residential or mixed income residential in that area. There wouldn't be a problem with that. So yeah, I would say include that.
Okay, good. So has anybody else had any other thoughts of list ideas which we haven't mentioned? Okay, so if not, so now I'm just going to try to see if I can put all these things we've discussed into buckets, and then from those buckets figure out, you know, what are the things which we want to do going forward. So maybe I'm going to we've got things around roads and sidewalks. I suppose within roads and sidewalks, we've probably also got anything that is part of the it's probably the welcome signage or beautification, and that stuff which is, so it's not something that a developer is going to pay for. So maybe this category will be this category of things to figure out is, how do we do things where there's basically, you know, no developer to come along and put the money in. So we as the town, or groups of people or volunteers, or whether it's the Yukon students, or whether it's Coogan, whether it's a non-profit, can say, here's how I can help by putting in trails. Actually, I guess one thing we could do is within zoning, Keith, tell me if I'm wrong, we could say that sidewalks would be a part of any reconstruction, so that sidewalks it's where people would connect one property to another.
Can I jump in for a second? I mean, do we, not to get into details, but rather than sidewalks, I want to think more about running and biking paths.
Yeah, and so that's probably an easier one to put in one bucket. But when we then think of, so I'm going to put walking and bike paths as one category. Sorry, I'm slow at writing, so let me just do that, walking. Okay, and then we have another category, which is how do we slow down the traffic? How do we connect the different parcels of land? How do we make the streetscape look more attractive? Has anyone got a good word for how do we describe that grouping of things, which would probably require not just the town, because I assume that is to the state road we've got on Route 27. So there's a whole stack of other groups that might be involved.
Bill, would something general like gateway improvements, so that it's not specific to any one spot or building? It really is sort of like you said, grouping the beautification, the signage, the not privately owned infrastructure that we're going to have to somehow put together to make things. I mean, I agree with what Pete said, that you come in and it's not a very attractive welcome, and that's something we could really make a change to, because there are some very attractive things to get to, but in the in-between, we want to find a way to make that in-between a more welcoming space.
Use the word gateway, and that can extend all the way up Coogan Boulevard, not just around the exit 90 area there as well. Okay, let's do that, and then I think let's have river access as a separate. Actually, let's do two things. Maybe we can put river access and linkage with Old Mystic in another category. Okay, and then not an easy category, but I think one category which we've got more control over is zoning related activities. So the zoning related activities is basically things which we could say, for mixed use, for heights of buildings, for density, for parking, all of those things we could put into one category, which would largely be things which would go through a zoning change process. I'm just going through my notes to see if there's anything which doesn't fall into those four categories. Okay, good. Okay, so basically we've got 4 categories. So one is walking and bike trails. Second one, we'll call it broadly the gateway, beautification, streetscape. 3 is river access and linkage to downtown Mystic. And the 4th one are zoning changes. So what I might do now is, so all of your ideas, I'll lump them into those 4 different categories, and then maybe we sort of start to, well, obviously some of them are a bit easier to do. So obviously the zoning one, maybe we said, listen, let's focus on that next. Or maybe Dave, maybe what we want to do is we want to pull together a broad level, a high level vision of each of these 4, and then have a community meeting or a discussion and include more people and, reach out to the chambers of commerce, the business owners, or maybe prepare a document, as opposed to getting ahead of ourselves. But again, nothing that we've actually discussed here is terribly different to what we discussed a couple of years ago. So I suppose that's a good news as well. The bad news is we haven't really made any progress on discussions which we started a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I think those, sort of getting the broader community engaged is going to be critical. I mean, otherwise you sort of get people that are angry because you're trying to move forward with a plan that wasn't their idea. And I think you're going to get some, input from, again, the companies there along the river, Handle Drive, that area, and probably, maybe that Deer Ridge neighborhood and the new residents on Jerry Brown. Probably the most effective. But I think if you can get them engaged and excited early on, you have a much greater chance of success.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yes, I'm just trying to think whether do we try to help that conversation? Do we try to do some artwork or leverage some of the artwork which we've already got? Keith, I don't know whether we've still got access to those drawings that the UConn students did of Cougar Boulevard. I don't think we've got any images of what a gateway as you come off exit 90 could look like.
The UConn students did have some sort of sketches like that. One of the things they had is to have sort of like decorate the highway underpass so it doesn't look so uninviting. They focus more like on the transportation infrastructure in the intersection of Coogan Boulevard and Route 27, having some sort of traffic island there. So something like that could be used or could be expanded upon. We could focus on a certain site and have an architect do something up that shows what new construction or redevelopment could look like on one of those older sites too.
Yeah. I'd be a bit hesitant to do any visioning on a particular site because whatever you do, you're going to upset and think, well, who are you to tell me what I should put on this block? However, if we did something around, whether it's just some trees on Coogan Boulevard or whether it's, and again, you showed me some of the work that the students were doing on walking trails. If there's any way we can connect those walking trails like into Old Mystic Village, or closer, which this is all stuff which everybody agrees with. It's like, oh, what a wonderful idea. So I think we want sort of ideas which are non-controversial, like decorations or painting graphics in the underpass, so that we don't have a cross Bronx bill. And I imagine anybody disagreeing with, oh my God, doesn't that just look better? And maybe if it wasn't so horrible, maybe I would walk from the Dunkin' Donuts to Old Mystic Village if the cars weren't going quite as fast as well. Having said that, so like any There was a picture of like basically putting a bike path and a median strip down the middle of Coogan Boulevard. Do we have that image?
If that was what the UConn students came up with, we have that. I can't remember if that was part of their plan.
I think it was.
Is it worth thinking about, again, just thinking of trying to engage people as early as possible? Because I think even you throw a rendering out there and people are like, whoa, where'd this come from? Whose idea was this? Maybe doing a survey or something like that. Just of, the contiguous residents and businesses of what's missing and what needs to be there. I think probably they're going to come to the same conclusions we have, but I think it'd be helpful to have them sooner rather than later.
Yeah, that's I think that's a great idea, Bill. Thomas Mitchell has been doing a great job at getting some surveys done, and we could do a story, and we could send it out with a link to a survey on what are the things we should like to have in this area.
Would it be worth thinking of doing a survey of visitors as well, of what their impressions are when they arrive? What they think of, the wayfinding, the mobility, the aesthetic, all that stuff. And I think you have sort of both of those sets of information. It gives you a pretty good basis to move forward.
Yeah. So I guess the biggest challenge is how do you survey easily and economically the visitors? So maybe we could ask the visitor center in Old Mystic Village if they could ask questions. We could maybe ask the Chamber of Commerce or the Mystic Chamber.
So hotels nowadays collect, everybody's email. See if they'd be willing to email out a survey. Might be a pretty cheap way to do it.
Yeah.
And get their game.
So I drove past, I went over to True Value yesterday. The parking lot at the Mystic Hilton was completely full. The parking lot at that diner was completely full. And the Mystic Aquarium had a line of people coming out the front door. I thought, everyone must have decided I had to get away from wherever that was they lived. And it's still pretty cool out. Okay, so
I think that would be great to know is what people think of the area when they come here. Are they disappointed when they come to exit 90, or do they think it's great as is? Do they want to see more of something? Do they think that's actual Mystic and then they go home? There's probably times where I've gone to other places where I'd appreciate being asked that.
Yeah. But then how do you ask, how do we figure out what the right questions are to ask?
Right.
Yeah, that's going to take some doing, I think.
Yeah.
And do we probably have two surveys, or maybe we have one that is aimed more for the businesses and the owners, and then maybe and the residents of TC80, and we have a mailing list, so we could actually do that old-fashioned way. But then we have another survey which would be for town residents, and maybe another survey for the visitors.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll take on the challenge of trying to come up with some questions for each of those three surveys, and then I suppose are we better off making them fairly open-ended questions rather than multiple choice or fixing a limited sphere of answers?
I mean, what you see a lot is multiple choice, or rate 1 to 10,
or maybe rating. Yeah.
And at the end, comments.
Yeah.
And it might be difficult to sort of differentiate when it comes to tourists, the TC80 area versus just Mystic in general. Because if you're visiting from somewhere else, we keep talking about the TC80 area, and to people who are visiting, it's just sort of where the hotel is, before you go elsewhere.
Most people don't study local zoning before they visit a place.
Yeah, or know
listen.
what town they're in,
Yeah.
you know, between Mystic and Groton.
Yeah.
I mean, Stonington and Groton.
To that point, I mean, you explain to people that Mystic doesn't actually exist. And, you know, they look at you like you're a crazy person to sort of explain all this, you know, what is perceived as Mystic and what doesn't exist.
So my number one proposal is we actually change the name of the town of Stonington to Mystic. I haven't got much support from it yet, though. But it'd make everything so much easier.
Right.
Then would we
Just name
take
your
over?
website then.
And would we have to go to battle with Groton to take over their portion of Mystic? So we
No,
can.
they could sue us if they wanted to, you know, breach of trademark or something.
I think we should do a sea battle on the river.
Yeah,
Be a great
yeah.
action, you know, generate a lot of interest.
I like
Battle
that
of Mystic.
idea.
But these meetings are so productive. It's amazing what we get done here.
Yep.
You know, it's
Okay.
okay. I know all their secrets, so I can help.
There you go.
That's right.
Spy in our midst.
Bill,
Okay.
so if I could just ask Bill's perspective on something. So we talked about, you know, Bill advocated for getting input early on from, you know, and Kevin, you mentioned both businesses and residents of Stonington. So we battled with this before when we had the Yukon work. Is do you give people, so I talked a little bit about this article I read on strong towns about don't keep asking people what they want. So if we ask the open, you know, completely open-ended blank slate question, what do you want for this area? You know, it's just it's almost like when we had the downtown Pawcatuck, you know, people are proposing that we have, you know, stuff that just really wouldn't be the way to go. So my question, maybe Bill's perspective, is do we provide some sort of vision to help guide conversation like you would with a kid? You know, do you say, you know, you can either you know, you can either have carrots or you can have, you know, peas, and so you give them you direct the response. So do we want to try to get our act together in that regard?
Well, I think the way around that, I think you're right. You can't say what you want to see there because you want to get all sorts of fantastical ideas.
Right.
I think what maybe you do. I mean, everybody likes to complain, so you ask them, what are the problems? You know, what are the issues? And you know, they'll all wax on forever, right? And then out of that, you can say, oh, look at the, you know, out of all these issues that you've identified, we've come up with these potential solutions. And to your point, you know, you can have peas, carrots, or broccoli. That's what you know, that's what's on the menu. You know, so I think if you kind of let them sort of voice their opinion in terms of what's wrong or, you know, the shortcomings and all of that. And again, I think they're probably going to identify all the things we already have, but I think they need to do that and then come up with a, you know, pretty short list of options.
Lots of times you get, you know, you ask people what's wrong for that exit and in that area, and they'll say there's too much traffic. It's, you know, there's not enough parking. You get all those usual things which aren't helpful. So, you know, if people are saying there's too much traffic, I think taking Bill's suggestion would be to say, okay, we'll propose strategies that would change the traffic patterns to make the people happy. So, but we may not have all the everything we need to do to be able to do that if it's state roads and so on and so forth. So, you know, I wonder how far do you create a vision so that you can get people behind. So, for example, if you had to go to the state to get funding to make changes, you'd have the community behind it because we kind of planted that seed. Or do we try to, I think what Bill is saying, you try to take people's input and then craft it into that vision that we think is, you know,
Yeah, because I think many of our choices here, Dave, are not an either or. It's a, it's not like, would you like a walking trail or a bike path, or would you like safer traffic or more beautiful traffic, right? And I think so. So a lot of the, so if we said, would you like to see walking trails and bike paths in Stonington? I assume everyone's going to say yes. But maybe if we don't go quite there yet, and we sort of say what are the things which could be improved, what's wrong with it now. But I think at the same time we want to sort of point that are you in favour of economic development? And maybe that's a question which we put in there as well, because all of these things, the only reason why we're doing them is to increase the grand list of Stonington, so all of us don't need to pay ever increasing taxes to pay for the services that we all want. But we can't do that without accepting that might mean more people living here. It might mean more traffic, getting off the highway and coming here. It's going to mean more people, using the water and the sewer system. Anyway, so let me I can have a go, and then we can circulate it around and then take it from there.
Just to your point a little bit about asking people if they want economic development. That idea of growing the grand list and so everybody pays less in taxes to get the service you want. That is a point that eludes a shocking number of people. That is not intuitive for me.
Right.
I think it's intuitive for all of us here. Like, it seems pretty obvious, but I think you'd be pretty surprised how many people just don't make that connection. Mm-hmm. All they see is there's more tourists here. I want less people around than more, and why are they building all this stuff? And I think there may be an educational component of like why this matters. Like, you want all these great things in town, but you got to pay for them somehow. And it would be nice to have people who were coming to visit pay for them instead of us. Is sort of it. But again, I mean, don't assume that that's obvious to everyone.
Right. So maybe what we could do is we at the beginning of the survey, we can say, why are we doing this exercise, which is these things for economic development, and then in that context, tell us the things which you think could do with improvement.
Yep.
Okay. Okay, so what I'm going to try to do is, one is I'll group all of your thoughts about the vision into, I'll call it a vision document, into these 4 categories, and then I'll come up with a draft of 3 different surveys, sort of one aimed at residents, one at tourists, and one at the business owners who own all the properties. Or maybe business, people who have, maybe if they're paying personal property taxes for a business at Old Mystic Village or at Clara Drive, then maybe we can send it out to them and they can tell us what they would like to see.
For what it's worth, I'm the head of the Merchants Association for the village, so I have the email distribution list.
Beautiful.
Okay, yeah, because the more we could do by an electronic poll and then have all of the information come in, the better it would be. Okay. Anything else?
Kevin, Sector had mentioned the highest and best use study grant. Is that something, so kind of part and parcel to my comments about, creating a vision, is that something we would want to explore and talk to Sector a little bit about whether or not, I don't know how the timing would work, but is that something that we would want to, if we got, a higher powered study, we can do the survey that we're talking about, but if we also got that sort of expert analysis behind any proposals too, would that be helpful? And again, what they're looking at is what the state is emphasizing, especially with pandemic recovery, is increasing tourism. So that would be, this is the region where we could get support probably for some state funding to do that study.
So Dave, what's the name of that grant?
Well, Nancy Kauser, who's the executive director of Sector, called it a highest and best use study. So
Okay.
I just was searching, I couldn't find, I'd have, but I would, on DEC or on a state website. But what I would do anyway, the best thing to do would be to just maybe connect with sector and say, we would like to understand if that's something that we could maybe pursue.
Yep. Okay. So I'll reach out to Sherry, who I've included in this group, and she was obviously on the first meeting, and see if she can help us out or understand if we need to be at a certain point before we can actually leverage that grant. But if this is sort of the right point where we're sort of wanting to maybe use, whether they do surveys or do surveys in conjunction with what we wanted to do, or do it instead of us doing it, then that would be ideal.
Perfect. Yeah, if we can use the sector, tap into that resource, that'd be good.
Okay, great. Anything from anybody else? Okay, in which case we'll adjourn at 9:55, and I'll draft a few emails, and where we can handle the next few steps via edits and to the surveys and to the vision.
Great.
Thank you.
Happy Monday morning, everybody.
Thank you too.
Productive day. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.